Hello everyone, it's Mr. Vallejo. Welcome to biology class. Today we will be taking a look at plant tissues. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. As always, the slides are available for your use in your learning management system, whether that is Canvas or Schoology. So let's get started for today. Let's take a look at plant tissues. Alrighty. Now I'll be covering uh, the tissues of the advanced plants, the angiosperms. So let's take a look at the plant tissues, roots, shoots, and leaves. First, we'll take a look at general tissues, and then we'll take a look at those three main parts of a flowering plant. Okay. In this particular PowerPoint, the background graphics are telling and are significant, and so I'll point those out as we go along. Excuse me. Um, in, uh, in flowering plants, the tissues are divided into the ground tissue, the vascular tissue, and the dermal tissue. Most of the tissue of the plant is ground tissue, and that's the structural tissue. Now, if you were a biology major, I'd have you learn about the collenchyme, the sclerenchyme, and the parenchyme. Some of these are living cells, some of these are dead cells, some are used for transport materials. You just need to know that most of the plant is made up of the ground tissue, which is the structural tissue. Now, the transport tissues are the vascular tissues. Remember, in our study of plant classification, we saw that there are vascular and non-vascular plants. The non-vascular plants are the bryophytes, like the liverwort or the moss, and then the rest of the plants were the vascular plants. The vascular plants have tubes within them, and those tubes carry different things. You'll see here in this diagram, the red structures are the xylem tissue. The xylem carries the water generally up the plant, and the phloem carries the food down from the top of the plant downward through the stem to the roots possibly. So the food flows through the rest of the plant through the phloem, which is your alliteration mnemonic for today. Food flows through the phloem. So if you can remember food flows through the phloem, then you'll remember that the phloem carries food and the xylem carries water. And then the protective tissue, the dermal tissue, is the epidermis. It's on the outside of the plant. We're going to see that in the leaf. There's an upper epidermis and a lower epidermis. And also, as we take a look at the lower epidermis, you'll find, and this is a photo of the lower epidermis, you'll see that there's tight junctions right here, that you have these pieces that look like jigsaw puzzles, and it's hard to get in between there. Even water has a hard time getting through there. Well, every once in a while there's a hole, and the hole is right there. The hole is called a stoma. So when you have more than one, here's another one. When you have more than one, they are called stomata. The hole itself is a stomata, and it's surrounded by two cells. It's guarded by two cells, so those are called the guard cells. So in a plant, you have ground tissue, you have vascular tissue, and you have dermal tissue. Now, before we go on to uh, the leaves and the stems and the roots, let's take a look at the growth region. The growth region is called the meristem. Now, first of all, you have the apical and the lateral meristems. And the apical meristem is the growth at the tip of the plant. It's a growth tissue that is at either the very tip top or the very bottom. That is at the tip of the stem and at the very tip of the root. those are called the apical meristems. Those cells are actively growing, but the plant also in its stem is growing wider, so it has some growth tissue there also. So that's called the lateral meristem. Now the apical meristem is involved with primary growth. That is to say that the plant growing up or the plant growing downward, pushing its roots into the soil. So the apical meristem is involved with primary growth. I remember 15 years ago, I was hanging a bird feeder in a tree, and I took my hammer and took a nail and hammered that nail into the tree. You go back to that tree today, that nail is actually still there. That's because a plant grows from the tips, from the very tip top and from the very bottom. If we were plants, we would be a little funny looking because we would, it would be like we were cone heads with long, big toes. And I'm glad that we don't have apical meristems like a plant does. The lateral meristem is involved with secondary growth. That's the increase in girth of the stem, like these huge trees, these redwood trees. Redwood trees are so tall. They're the tallest trees, 450 feet tall. Redwood trees can be. There's some that are even more massive, though. Like you may be familiar with the sequoia trees that live not too far from here. They live, in Yosemite National Park, or even in Sequoia National Park. You can find the sequoia trees, which are not quite as tall as the redwood trees, but so much more massive. It's incredible. Um, that's the apical and lateral meristems. Now, as far as annuals and perennials, an annual plant is one that grows during a year, and then it blooms possibly during a particular season of the year, and it seems to die out, and then it comes back same time next year, or maybe that plant is dead, and the whole reproductive process goes along, and then the plants flower later the next year about the same time. So it's seasonal. Perennials seem to be green all year round, like in this picture right here. We have gymnosperms like pine trees and uh, conifers in general. They're green all year round. So we call those perennials. Now perennials typically have a very hard woody stem where you would get wood that you might get at the home improvement store. Whereas an annual plant has an herbaceous stem. Herbaceous is the green stem, like a tomato plant might have an herbaceous stem. Not as sturdy, but certainly grows quickly. All right, so now you know something about plant tissues. You know that most of the plant is ground tissue, but you know that there are tubes within its ground tissue called the xylem and the phloem. Those are vascular tissues. You know also that um, there's the protective cells on the outside. There's the epidermal cells. Um, and you also know a little bit about the meristematic tissue, the growth regions. So let's go ahead and take a look at roots. Here's some roots in the background of this picture. We're going to take a look at the idea of a primary root, and then we'll take a look at the specific structure of the root. And then I'll give you an idea about the many functions of roots. Alrighty, in the background of this slide, you see that there is a taproot. A taproot is a large single root, like a carrot is a taproot. You ever seen a carrot plant above the surface? It's a little green plant. But if you dig up the roots, you'll find that big orange thing down there. That's a taproot. Some trees that are in environments where there is not a lot of water have one large taproot also. Some trees that live in environments where it's very windy and these plants need to be very, very sturdy, have one main large root that goes so deep into the soil. That is also taproot. Other plants also have, or instead have something called a lateral root or fibrous root. You know, like in the photo down here in the lower right, you see that here's a clump of grass, and this grass has roots that don't go very deep, you know, maybe 4 to 6 inches, but then they grow outward. And so they're also called fibrous roots. And so those are two different strategies of getting water. Now, if you don't have a lot of water, go deep and get some. Go all the way down to the water table and suck it up. Or if you live in an environment where you are going to get a lot of water, you want to be able to pick up that water fast. So you lay out a large mat of roots and you go outwards. You don't have to go very deep, but you need to be able to get it very quickly. So that's what grass is. So those are types of roots. Now, this we've studied when we were taking a look at mitosis. This is called the onion root, and the onion root has a cap right here. The onion root tip has a cap, and the cap is for protection, not much going on. But if you look back here, many of these cells are going through active cellular reproduction. Many of these cells are going to be at different stages of mitosis. So that's the value of taking a look at this particular slide. So this is the meristem. This is where there's active growth. You might catch a cell at any stage of mitosis: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. Just take a look at the cap at a higher power than what you see here, because you don't see much detail. Um, just looking around right there, there's some cells that look like they have a gap between those chromosomes, so that would be a cell at anaphase. Okay, so this is the growth region. This is the meristem that is on the bottom side of the plant at the root tip. Now, whether you're at the root tip or well into the root itself, we take a look at the primary growth of the root. That's a root getting bigger and going downwards or even out. But their structure is like this. It has a plant root has root hairs. Root hairs are where the water goes in. If you when you buy a carrot at the store, typically they're nice and straight and they don't have any root hairs on them. But if you go to the farmer's market or you buy some organic carrots, you might see that the carrot's kind of a wavy, wrinkly kind of thing with little yellow hairs all over it. Well, that's not really palatable. So before it gets to market, they'll put the carrots in a machine, and the machine will strip all the root hairs off it. But in order to suck up some water, the roots have to have these root hairs. The root hairs are the site of water uptake. Now, once the water gets in, like let's say it's this root right here, there are little hairs that are attached to this root. Well, the water gets into this first section called the cortex, and it goes in through, actually it goes around these cells because they're not packed too tightly. Like if you look at this picture here, the water might go through here instead of going through the cell. Remember, the cell membrane regulates what goes in and out of the cell. Instead of going through the cell, just go around the cell. That might be a quick way to go. Well, that only happens so far because when it gets to endodermis, which is right here, this purple layer, and over here, these are the endodermis cells. Between the endodermis and the cortex, you have a layer of cells right here, and this layer of cells called the Casparian strip. What happens in the Casparian strip is that's a waxy layer right there in those endodermis cells. And what happens is that waxy layer stops the water from going in between the endodermal cells. So the water is forced to go through the endodermal cells. That means the cell membrane of the endodermal cells can do their job and regulate what goes in. And what they regulate what goes in to the endodermal cell and out the other side of the endodermal cell. Then, in essence, they are regulating what gets in through the cortex, through the endodermis to the rest of the root, to the middle of the root. And then once they get to the xylem, that's like an elevator that takes the water up the root, not just through the root, but up through the stem, up through the plant. So that's the cortex, the endodermis, and the Casparian strip. All of this together is considered the pericycle, right? So you have the pericycle right there that is made up of the xylem and the phloem. Some would say that the pericycle, just these cells, not including the xylem and phloem. Others consider the whole thing to be the pericycle. At any rate, it is the part that has the vascular tissue, so this is also called the vascular cylinder. Right. More on root structure. Remember, secondary growth is growth that's going outwards rather than up and down. That happens at the vascular cambium. Now, it's hard to see, but it's in between these red arrows right here. The layer of cells are squashed together. Unlike these here, which seem to be spread out, these here very much compacted. So that's the vascular cambium. The vascular cambium is the lateral meristem. It's the growth tissue that makes a plant wider. So that's the vascular cambium. Now, what do roots do? When I originally wrote this lecture, I forgot to put anchor the plant down, but that's probably the main thing, isn't it? That's what a root does. It holds a plant in place. So let's not forget that the function of the root is to anchor the plant. Some plants use roots to store water and food. So we have storage right here. And with the root hairs are, that's where the water goes in, and not just the water, but stuff dissolved in the water. And so the absorption of water and inorganic nutrients happens at the root. Let's take a look at the stems. In botany, the stems are called the shoots. So we'll take a look at the structure and the function of stems. If you take a look at this cell in the background, most of the ground tissue here in the stem is called pith. So this is all the pith. And then the vascular bundles are here. Okay. And you can see that the water is moving up. So this is a cross section of a stem going this way. So this is the xylem tissue where the water would go up, and this is the phloem tissue where the food would generally go down. Now, secondary growth in the stem, when the stem gets wider, as I said earlier, it happens at the vascular cambium. The vascular cambium is the meristematic tissue, the lateral meristematic tissue. And here's some terms associated with stem structures. First, you had springwood and summerwood. Summerwood, in many locales during the summer, there's less water. So because there's less water, the cells are compacted together. And so that's why you might get a line like that. And so that line is made up of cells that are very, very close together. So that's summerwood. And then springwood happens when you have a lot of growth. So you might have a lot of growth in this region, and then over here, you have just a little bit growth. And so that's how you get tree rings. And so the cells that they're spread out, that's a springwood where there's a lot of water, and the cells that are compacted together, that's a summerwood. Another set of relative terms are heartwood and sapwood. The heartwood is deep on the inside of a tree when you're taking a look at lumber, but sapwood is the outside of the tree, the very outside part of the wood, which is all this from here to about there. The sapwood is just this outside region, the purple in this picture. That's because, remember, the phloem is on the outside of the stem, and the phloem is carrying food. And for a plant, the food is in the form of sugar. So sap is sugary. So the sapwood is that wood on the outside of the stem. And I mentioned tree rings. Well, in areas that have seasons, then you're going to get rings, and those rings then are seasonal. Seasons happen every year, so if you count a tree's rings, you can figure out how old a tree is. So that process is called dendrochronology, tree ring dating. Now, you don't have to kill a tree in order to see how old it was, but you could take a big stick that looks like a straw, actually kind of like a T. I have two pens right here, and then you would take it and jam it into the tree stem, and then you would turn it, and uh, and then as that happens, you're making a core out of the tree stem, and then you pull that gently out of the tree, and you can tell how old a tree is by counting the rings on your um, on the piece of wood that comes out on that core that comes out. Okay, and early wood cells have large diameters and thin walls. So they have thin walls, so they grow a lot in that early wood and that spring wood. They have large diameters because they have thin walls and because there's a lot of water. The water goes into these cells and pushes the cell wall apart from the inside out. So that's stem structure. Now, here's the bark of the tree. The bark of the tree is right here, and the bark of the tree actually consists of the cork right here, the phloem, which is the purple region here, and then this line is the vascular cambium. It's the lateral meristematic tissue, the growth tissue. So all the new cells will go out this way. Phloem gets crushed every year though, so this is this year's phloem. But xylem actually stays every year. So this is last year's xylem. This is the year before xylem. This is the year before that, and that's why again you can count the rings on a tree and figure out how old it was. What do stems do? Stems obviously hold the plant up, but uh, stems are also how the food gets from the leaves down to the rest of the plant. We call that from the source, the leaves, to the sink, where it might be stored, whether that's in the stem or in the roots. And then the transportation of water and minerals, the water goes up through a plant. Remember, it goes through the root hairs. But once it goes through the root hairs and gets past the endodermal cells, past the Casparian strip, it takes that elevator up, which is the xylem. How high can it go? Well, due to the transpiration cohesion theory, transpiration says that the water is lost through the bottoms of the leaves, and so without that loss of water, you wouldn't have water coming up the stem of the tree to replace that water. That's called transpiration. And if you have water going up to replace the water that's being lost at the very tip top of the bottom of the leaves, then when one water molecule moves up, it grabs another molecule and brings that up. And so water is cohesive, so that this is called the transpiration cohesion theory, and this is how water gets up a plant. This is how in the redwood forest you're going to have trees that are 450 feet tall. How does water get up there? Through the transpiration cohesion theory. Also, there's negative pressure. There's more pressure in the soil. The water pressure in the soil is greater than in the roots, so that pressure is going to push the water into the tree itself. And then some stems are used for food storage, like this is a shot of an asparagus that you might eat, asparagus stems. And so asparagus is a plant that stores the food products in the plant part. Before we get to uh, the the leaves, let's take a look at the buds. Buds give rise to leaves, flowers, and branches. Um, Over here, you can see these are buds that lead to the leaves, and they it can also lead to flowers and branches also. So that's called the bud. Let's go to the final part of the plant, which is called the leaves. Take a look at their structure and function because that is a recurring theme in biology. As far as structure goes, here's some topics. Um, Plant leaves are adaptive. And so here are two extremes. Here's a conifer with needles, and these needles are modified leaves. And you can see a clump of snow here, but really most of the snow doesn't stay on there and just comes off the plant. Now, if you can picture a broad leaf, you could have a lot of snow on that and then it would break. Well, these guys, the snow doesn't stay on there, and so the snow comes off of the plant. On the other hand, in the desert, here you have some spines on a cactus plant, and these spines are protective because this particular cactus is storing moisture inside the stem. So, like an antelope might want to nibble on the inside of a cactus plant, but it thinks better when it has to go through these needles in order to get that moisture. Also, another thing though, you can see in this picture here, there's a fair amount of shade down here, and even right there. I am aware of a study where some researchers took the needles off of a cactus, and the internal temperature was too high, and it turns out these needles, the shade given by these produced by these needles, is a significant amount. And if you take off the needles, then take off these spines here, these spikes, then the cactus would die because it would get too hot. Now, as far as leaf structure goes, there's a difference between simple and compound leaves. Now, this is a simple leaf, and so a simple leaf has a one flat part. It's called the blade, but a compound leaf has many little flat parts. So that's the difference between a simple and a compound leaf. And actually, the venation is something I want to mention because this one is better to see than the next slide. This has what's called a palmate venation because all the main lines come from this one point right here. Like my fingers come out of my palm, then on this leaf, you have these veins coming out of this point right there. And then this is called pinnate venation because you see that these little leaflets are coming off the main vein right here. And so if you can picture it without these flat parts, it's how I would draw because I have minimal art skills, how I might draw a pine tree, one line, and then I would draw some needles going out and getting bigger as I go down. Okay, so that's called pinnate venation because it looks like a pine tree, and this is called palmate venation because it's like fingers coming out of your palm. This venation is due to a structure called the bundle sheath, and the bundle sheath, that's the vascular tissue made up of the phloem and the xylem. In the leaf, though, the phloem is bigger in this cross section than the xylem is in between. And that makes sense because the leaf is where food is being produced, so this is pumping that food out, getting it down out of the leaf and through the branches to the stems to the rest of the plant. So venation is due to the bundle sheath. If you were a biology major, we would make you memorize this cross section such that you could reproduce this. These are all the important parts of the cross section of a leaf. And so here's the upper epidermis. This right here is called the mesophyll, and so there's the term right there. The mesophyll is made up of cells that go straight up and down. These are called palisade cells. I live near a city called Pacific Palisades, yeah, which is by Malibu, and and so in the Palisades, if you were at the beach, you look back at the cliff, you see because of erosion, it looks like you have you have erosion going down the cliffs, and they're straight up and down, so it makes the rocks look like it's kind of skinny. So that's a palisade. Over here, another part, it's the darker green part right here, the mesophyll. Not only do you have the palisade cells, which are part of the mesophyll, but you have the spongy cells, which are part of the mesophyll. In the spongy cells, you have air spaces, and those are important because the air is going to go through the bottom of the leaf and then find places to stay. And so the air is going to dissolve through these cells here. The carbon dioxide is going to go in, the oxygen is going to go out and eventually out. The water, we want the water to stay in, but eventually it comes out. Remember, it's called transpiration. But without that loss of water, without that transpiration, you wouldn't have water getting up to the rest of the plant. And then finally, you have the bundle sheath that we saw earlier. We have the xylem and the phloem. Phloem typically on the outside, xylem on the inside. But this is what causes the veins in the leaf. Now, what does the leaf do? Well, the leaf, its main job is to make food. And what it does is it captures the light energy and it through photosynthesis, is able to convert the light energy along with carbon dioxide and water, convert that into sugar or glucose. Remember, number two, the transpiration is necessary for water uptake. If you don't have that loss of water through the leaves up the top, then you're not going to get water moving up. When plants go dormant, when they lose, when deciduous plants lose their leaves, then they're basically turning down their metabolism way down low because now you don't have any water going up the plant, or at least it's minimized, and so the metabolic processes are turned down so much that the plant is considered dormant. And then the background picture here is another picture of a stomata or a stoma. And so there's the hole right there. Remember, one hole is a stoma, many holes are stomata. This is a really close cross section of a or micrograph, not a cross section, but a micrograph of a leaf. So there's the right there behind is the stoma, and then these are the two guard cells. And the guard cells, once they get swollen up, then they open up the stoma, and when the guard cells lose water and we say it loses turgor pressure, then it closes. So down here I wrote guard cells, stomata, and turgor. The turgor seems to follow the flow of potassium ions in and out of the guard cells. If a couple of ions go into the guard cell, then the water goes into the guard cell, and then the guard cells swell up and the hole opens up. But then when the potassium goes out, the water goes out, and then the hole closes because the water is going away. So that's how the leaves control their function and control transpiration and pick up that carbon dioxide so that they can make food. So plant tissues, those are some interesting insights on plant tissues. We took a look at different type of tissues specifically, and then we took a look at roots, shoots, and leaves. So hopefully you learned something in biology class today. I'm Mr. Vallejo. Thanks for coming. Have a great day. Go kiss a plant. Bye now.